Good afternoon. My name is David Siegel from Lombard, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, and I'm here to chat with you today about what's going on in Illinois. I called it the multi-prong attack because there's a lot going on, a lot of different laws, a lot of different angles that are being addressed in court action. I will take, of course, a moment to thank Alan and Julianne and Adam Kraut for doing this for every year, doing a great job having me back. I want to thank hopefully some of the folks from the Illinois State Rifle Association. I've been representing SAF for 15 years. It feels weird having that come out, saying it out loud. And I am also general counsel for the Illinois State Rifle Association, who is just really, really great when they see an issue saying, hey, Dave, let's see if there's something you can do to help this person out. And in turn, when I come to them and say, hey, talk to someone, I think there might be something we can do to help this person out and maybe make some inroads against the laws in general. They're always willing to jump in that sandbox with me. So I appreciate them being always so great in that regard. So I want to start this with back in June of last year, of course, with the Bruen decision. And the Bruen decision kind of upended everything we had been doing for the last decade. All the legal analysis, all the legal arguments we had been making, mostly in the areas of this level of scrutiny versus that one. All of a sudden, all the frustration, all the victories, and also went by the wayside, and suddenly none of that seemed to matter anymore. And one of the cases where it was noticed most acutely, especially by me as I was counsel on the case, was the case of Atkinson versus Garland. Atkinson was a nonviolent felon from decades ago, minor financial crime. I'm not diminishing that, neither does he, but it was a nonviolent felony. And over many decades, he certainly proved his redemption as a citizen, as a moral, law-abiding person. When the court dismissed it and said, we sued and said he deserves a hearing to show that he's among the people that have Second Amendment rights, notwithstanding the federal law 922G1 that says otherwise. The court dismissed it and said, under levels of scrutiny where I, the district judge, am going to uphold this. But while the case was on appeal, Bruen came down. So it actually came down in the middle of the briefing schedule. So suddenly, in fact, everything we had been arguing in the case up until that moment didn't seem to matter. And all of a sudden, the reply brief and the oral argument became all about Bruen. The court, the Seventh Circuit, reversed the dismissal and remanded to the district court and said, why don't you talk about what this Bruen case means to this case? So that was a victory because the day before we didn't have a claim and now we do. We're going to amend the complaint to make a claim under Bruen because obviously it didn't exist when we filed it. And it just is it's just an example, a microcosm, how dramatically the law changed thanks to that decision. The next case going on is the assault weapon case. Illinois calls it PICA, Protect Illinois Communities Act. I know that it's coming up in more detail with our next speaker. Stick around for that. But suffice to say, anyone that's lived in a state or talked to anyone in a state that has had one of these laws gets the gist of it. There's a number of features that if the firearm has them, it's called an assault weapon and therefore banned. Or there's a list, usually of a couple hundred firearms, that if that those are banned or anything like them, any copies or anything similar. So Illinois passed that, and they said if you own one as of the date of, and large capacity magazines, I'm sorry, anything over 10 rounds for a rifle or 15 rounds for a handgun is now prohibited. So if you have one prior to the date of the passage of the law, which was this past January 10th, you're allowed to keep it, but you have to register it with the state by next January 1st, so up in a few months. If you didn't have it by then, it's banned, it's prohibited, you're not allowed to have it. So there were a number of legal challenges, some in state court, some in the Southern District of Illinois, some in the Northern District of Illinois. The state court down the southern part of the state issued a temporary restraining order against the law, but it only applied to the 2,000 or so plaintiffs in the case. And I mean that literally, like, there was a petition for, in one case, there was about 4 of them, there was a petition for TRO with literally 900 affidavits attached. It's one, I was really worried when I got it. I'm like, how am I going to read 900? But then when I saw it was all affidavits, I was, okay, I can get through this. So there was that. And then in the Southern District, 4 cases were put together, including the one that I'm counsel on, called the Harrell case. And a judge granted a preliminary injunction against that case, against the law in those cases. There were 2 in the Northern District of Illinois up in Chicago, and the district judge denied a request for injunction. So all of this got appealed where it's in the 7th Circuit right now. The judge, the 7th Circuit reversed the stay, or stayed the injunction, so that injunction was in place for only about a week. And in the state case, the Illinois Supreme Court a few weeks back reversed the TROs and basically threw out those cases. So what we're waiting on now is a decision from the 7th Circuit, and quite possibly, maybe even probably, a trip to the Supreme Court. This is not an issue that is going to be resolved quietly. I suspect this one is going to go the distance. The questions, though, are raised by this. In the meantime, while we're waiting for the 7th Circuit to rule, the Illinois State Police just a few days ago put out emergency rules for registering the firearms. So what happens with that? Does everyone have to register? Assuming they do, what happens if the court overturns the law? What happens to that registry? What happens to all the firearms that were purchased during the week of the federal injunction? What happens to the firearms purchased during the few months by the 2,000 plaintiffs in the state cases? There's a lot of messy issues, a lot of unanswered questions, some of which are probably going to wind up in their own lawsuits because that's just how Illinois seems to work. So ultimately, again, we're going to wind up with a whole bunch of muddy issues, and I think the best way that they're going to wind up being resolved one way or the other, I guess, is for SCOTUS to ultimately take the case. So first things first, we'll see what the 7th Circuit says. The arguments were back in June, and we'll go from there. The next case that I want to chat about is the Miller case. In some ways, if you've heard me speak before, it sounds like a greatest hits album. But Miller's been kicking around for a while. It's the Illinois foster care and daycare case where the state has disarmed foster parents and daycare home parents pretty much completely. I won't go into all the details, but they basically have made it so you can't, if you have a foster license, not even if you have a foster child in the home, if you have a foster license, you're all but disarmed if someone decides to break in the middle of the night, let's say. And daycare home, if someone comes in, you're disarmed totally. The Seventh Circuit, this is another one. It was pending on appeal. Bruin came out, and the Seventh Circuit reversed the summary judgment that the court had issued in favor of the state and said, well, Bruin, so let's send it back to the district court to see what the court thinks about, what the district court thinks about it, and we'll go from there. So again, the beat goes on, but we had lost, and now we have a case again. So I think that the state's going to have a lot of trouble justifying the laws that I've been talking about under the Bruin standard. They were under levels of scrutiny. They were able to get away with it, and they might not be able to under Bruin. Am I out, or are you just? Oh, okay. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. All right. Schoenthal versus Raoul. The state bans concealed carry on public transportation. There's a pending challenge to that in the district court. It's headed toward the summary judgment filings. Again, I don't know how the state's going to justify that restriction under Bruin. Looking for historical analogs, they just don't really exist. And I think the state's going to have they'll trot out someone to try and argue otherwise, but the evidence just simply isn't there. Anderson and Clark versus Raoul is a Southern Illinois case challenging the state's ban on suppressors. Again, the state is arguing that that suppressors aren't arms, so therefore they're not protected by the Second Amendment at all. Discovery's been stayed while we fight that out, but I think that given that arms are not just the arm itself, but also the component parts that function with the firearm, I think is a pretty solid argument why the court should deny that motion. And again, once you go to Bruin, once you look at the standard, I don't see how that possibly holds up. There's a bunch of state cases involving clear and present danger where the state goes and revokes people. You heard a little bit about a similar thing with the red flag law. The state's going through old records and revoking people's licenses, their FOID cards, based on year-old, 2-year, 4-year-old allegations that the state police investigated the first time and found not substantiated. But after the tragedy in Highland Park a year plus ago, they've gone and revoked thousands of people's license. I don't have the exact number, but it's there. It's in that range. They don't tell people why they're revoking, and you practically have to sue to find out. There is a case in the Illinois Supreme Court right now where someone's arguing that they should have the right under FOIA to get that information. We'll see how that pans out, but it seems like a pretty good Fourth Amendment violation when you get your rights stripped away and you can't even find out why. And, well, I think that that's running on, that's going to have to serve as my capsule summary for what's going on in the Prairie State.